Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Isabella Martinez had been cleaning penthouse apartments for 3 years, but she'd never seen anything quite like Christopher Blackwood's place. The 42nd floor apartment overlooked the entire city, with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. What made it even more impressive was that Christopher seemed to actually live there, unlike most of her wealthy clients who treated their luxury apartments like expensive storage units. There were books scattered around, a coffee mug left on the kitchen counter, and actual personal touches that made the space feel like a home rather than a showroom. Isabella had been Mr. Blackwood's housekeeper for 6 months now, coming in 3 times a week while he was at his investment firm. She'd only met him in person twice, once when she was first hired through the cleaning agency, and once when she'd accidentally arrived early and found him working from home. Both times he'd been polite but distant, tall, dark-haired, with sharp gray eyes and the kind of serious expression that suggested he had more important things to think about than household staff. He always left her payment on the kitchen counter with a brief note about any specific cleaning requests. Today's note was longer than usual. Isabella, please focus on the master bedroom today. I'm expecting guests this weekend. Also, there may be some papers scattered around my desk. Please don't move them. Thank you. CB. Isabella smiled at the formal tone. In 6 months, she'd learned that Christopher Blackwood was incredibly organized, surprisingly thoughtful. He always left bottled water and snacks for her. And probably the loneliest person she'd ever encountered. The apartment was pristine, not because he was messy, but because he rarely seemed to live in it. She started with the master bedroom, a spacious room dominated by a king-sized bed that looked like it was rarely slept in. The walk-in closet was filled with expensive suits arranged by color, and the bathroom contained more grooming products than most women owned. As she dusted the nightstand, Isabella noticed something unusual. There was a small stack of papers tucked partially under a book, not the business documents Christopher usually left scattered around, but what looked like personal letters written in his careful handwriting. Isabella tried to ignore them and continue cleaning, but a gust of wind from the air conditioning scattered the papers across the floor. As she knelt to collect them, her eyes caught a few words at the top of one page. My dearest love. Isabella's heart stopped. Christopher Blackwood had a girlfriend? In all the months she'd been cleaning his apartment, she'd never seen any evidence of a woman in his life. No feminine clothing, no toiletries, no photos of couples. But here was proof that the cold, distant businessman was apparently writing love letters to someone. She knew she shouldn't read them. It was a complete violation of privacy, and she could lose her job. But curiosity got the better of her, and she found herself scanning the first few lines. My dearest love, I know I'll never have the courage to give you these letters, but writing them is the only way I can express what you mean to me. You bring light into my world in ways you'll never understand. Isabella's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. These were deeply personal, intimate thoughts that she had no business reading. She quickly gathered the scattered papers, trying not to look at the words, but couldn't help noticing there were dozens of them, all written in Christopher's handwriting, all addressed to my dearest love. As she stood up with the collected letters, one more line caught her eye. The way you hum while you work fills this empty apartment with music. Isabella frowned. That was oddly specific. Who would Christopher know that hummed while working? And why would he mention an apartment in a love letter? She shook off the questions and carefully placed the letters back under the book where she'd found them. It wasn't her business who Christopher was in love with, even if she was surprised that someone so cold and formal was capable of writing such romantic words. The rest of her cleaning routine passed in a distracted haze. Isabella found herself wondering about Christopher's mysterious girlfriend. Was she someone from his business world? A socialite he'd met at charity galas? When would Isabella finally see evidence of her in the apartment? As she finished vacuuming and prepared to leave, Isabella noticed something else unusual. Christopher had left her payment on the counter as always, but beside it was a small vase with fresh flowers. White roses that definitely hadn't been there 2 days ago. Isabella smiled. Maybe Christopher was planning to propose to his mystery girlfriend. The guest mentioned in his note, the extra attention to the bedroom, the flowers. It all pointed to a romantic weekend planned. She felt an unexpected pang in her chest at the thought. Not jealousy exactly. Christopher Blackwood was completely out of her league, and she'd never thought of him as anything other than a polite employer. But there was something sad about the idea of him finally sharing his beautiful, lonely apartment with someone else. Isabella shook off the melancholy. Christopher deserved happiness, and whoever this mystery woman was, she was lucky to have someone who wrote such beautiful letters about her. As she gathered her supplies and prepared to leave, Isabella made a mental note to be extra careful around any romantic decorations or preparations she might encounter in future cleanings. The last thing she wanted was to accidentally disrupt what seemed to be Christopher's first serious relationship. She had no idea that every single one of those love letters had been written about her. 2 weeks later, Isabella arrived at Christopher's penthouse for her regular Wednesday cleaning session. She'd been thinking about the love letters on and off since discovering them, wondering when she'd finally meet the mysterious girlfriend or see signs of the romantic weekend that had been planned. But the apartment looked exactly the same as always, pristine, organized, and somehow lonely despite its luxury. Isabella went through her normal routine, starting with the kitchen and living areas before moving to the bedrooms. Christopher's note today was brief. Isabella, normal cleaning today. I'll be out until evening. Thank you. CB. As she worked, Isabella found herself humming softly, a habit she'd developed to make the large, quiet apartment feel less empty. She was dusting the living room bookshelves when she noticed something that made her freeze. There were new letters. A small stack of papers sat on Christopher's desk, partially hidden under a business magazine. Isabella told herself to ignore them, but as she dusted around the desk, she couldn't help but notice they were written in the same careful handwriting as the love letters she'd found in the bedroom. This time, she was more careful not to disturb them. But as she cleaned, a phrase from the top letter caught her eye. Your laugh echoes through these rooms long after you've gone. Isabella's dusting cloth stopped moving. She looked around the apartment with new awareness. In the 6 months she'd been working here, she'd never heard Christopher laugh. She'd barely heard him speak beyond polite pleasantries. But she laughed. She laughed at funny things she read in the books scattered around, at silly thoughts that occurred to her while cleaning, at her own clumsiness when she occasionally bumped into furniture. Could Christopher hear her when she was working? Did he sometimes stay home when she thought he was at the office? Isabella shook her head. She was being ridiculous. Christopher's mystery girlfriend probably laughed when she visited. Just because Isabella had never met her didn't mean she didn't exist. But as Isabella continued cleaning, she became more aware of her own habits in the apartment. She did hum while she worked. She did laugh at her own thoughts. She had developed a routine of talking to herself in the empty rooms, commenting on books she noticed or admiring the view from the windows. When she moved to the master bedroom, Isabella was extra careful around the nightstand where she'd first discovered the love letters. But today, they weren't there. Instead, there was a new letter sitting openly on the dresser, as if Christopher had been writing it recently and hadn't had time to put it away. Isabella tried to ignore it, but the opening line was clearly visible. "My beautiful angel, today I came home early and heard you singing in the kitchen." Isabella's blood ran cold. Singing in the kitchen? She had been singing yesterday, Tuesday, when she thought Christopher was at work, a silly song from the radio that had been stuck in her head all day. But that would mean— "No," Isabella said aloud, her voice echoing in the empty bedroom. "That's impossible." She looked at the letter again, her hand shaking slightly. The handwriting was definitely Christopher's, but the words couldn't be about her. She was just the cleaning lady. Wealthy, sophisticated men, like Christopher Blackwood, didn't write love letters about their housekeepers. But as she stood there, more pieces began clicking into place. The way Christopher always seemed to know exactly when she'd finished cleaning, even though she never had a set schedule. The thoughtful touches, bottled water, snacks, flowers that appeared after she'd mentioned loving fresh blooms while dusting. The specific details in the letters she'd glimpsed, humming while working, laughing in empty rooms, bringing light and music to the apartment. Isabella sank onto the edge of Christopher's bed, her cleaning supplies forgotten. Was it possible? Had she completely misunderstood the situation? She thought back to her brief interactions with Christopher, the way his serious expression would soften slightly when she thanked him for leaving snacks, how he'd once asked if she was comfortable with the apartment temperature after she'd mentioned being cold while cleaning. The time he'd left a note apologizing for any inconvenience when repair workers needed building access during her usual cleaning hours. Small, thoughtful gestures that she'd attributed to his being a considerate employer. But what if they were something more? Isabella's heart was racing now. She looked at the letter on the dresser again, fighting the urge to read it fully. If these letters really were about her, then Christopher had been expressing his feelings through writing because he couldn't say them out loud. But that raised another terrifying possibility. If the letters were about her, and if she'd been finding them accidentally, then Christopher might not want her to know. He might be mortified that his private thoughts had been discovered. Isabella stood up abruptly, suddenly desperate to finish cleaning and leave before she could think about this any further. Whether the letters were about her or not, she'd already violated Christopher's privacy by reading parts of them. The last thing she wanted was to make him uncomfortable in his own home. As she gathered her cleaning supplies from the bedroom, Isabella made a decision. She would be extra careful to avoid any personal papers in the future, and she would definitely stop humming and talking to herself while she worked, just in case. But as she prepared to leave the empty apartment, Isabella caught sight of her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with something that looked suspiciously like hope. Because despite her rational mind telling her it was impossible, part of her desperately wanted those beautiful letters to be about her. She had no idea that Christopher was sitting in his car in the building's parking garage, trying to work up the courage to come upstairs and finally tell her the truth. Christopher Blackwood sat in his corner office on the 45th floor of Blackwood Investments, staring out at the city skyline without seeing it. For the third time this week, he'd left work early with the intention of finally talking to Isabella, only to lose his nerve and drive around the block until he was sure she'd finished cleaning and left. This was ridiculous. He was a successful businessman who negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But the thought of confessing his feelings to his housekeeper left him completely paralyzed. "Mr. Blackwood?" His assistant Monica knocked on the open office door. "Your 4 o'clock appointment is here." Christopher pulled his attention back to work with effort. "Send them in." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of portfolio reviews and investment strategy meetings. Christopher went through the motions professionally, but his mind kept drifting to Isabella, to the way she'd looked that morning 6 months ago when he'd first met her. Professional and efficient, but with warm brown eyes that seemed to see everything. He'd tried so hard to be distant and formal, the way he was with all service providers. But Isabella had a way of bringing life to his sterile apartment. She hummed while she worked, talked to his plants as she watered them, and left little touches that made his space feel like a home. Books arranged more invitingly, throw pillows positioned just right, flowers from his weekly delivery arranged with obvious care. Christopher had fallen for her gradually, then all at once. What started as appreciation for her thoroughness had become anticipation for her visits. He'd begun working from home on her cleaning days just to hear her voice echoing through the apartment. He'd started leaving little thoughtful touches, her favorite sparkling water, snacks he'd noticed she enjoyed, fresh towels because he'd observed her using his bathroom to wash her hands. And when the feelings became too intense to ignore, he'd started writing letters. It was supposed to be temporary, a way to process his emotions until he could figure out how to move on. But the more he wrote, the more he realized how deeply he'd fallen for Isabella Martinez, a woman he barely knew beyond the glimpses of personality she revealed while she worked. Now he had dozens of letters, all expressing feelings he couldn't find the courage to voice. And lately, he'd been getting careless, leaving them where she might find them. Part of him wondered if it was intentional, a subconscious way of letting her discover the truth without having to risk direct rejection. "Mr. Blackwood?" Monica appeared in his doorway again. "It's 6:30. Your last meeting canceled, and you asked me to remind you about your 7 o'clock dinner." Christopher frowned. "What 7 o'clock dinner?" Monica consulted her tablet. "The reservation at Le Bernardin. You made it last week and said it was important." Christopher's stomach dropped. He had made that reservation, but not for himself. It was part of an elaborate plan he'd been developing to finally tell Isabella how he felt. A plan that now seemed completely insane in the light of day. "Monica, cancel the reservation." "Sir, are you sure? It was very difficult to get that table on short notice." Christopher rubbed his temples. "Yes, I'm sure. The whole idea was inappropriate." After Monica left, Christopher leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The plan had seemed so perfect when he'd conceived it. He would arrange for Isabella to find a letter that invited her to dinner, not as his employee, but as someone he cared about. A chance to meet on equal ground, outside the employer-employee dynamic that made his feelings so complicated. But in the harsh reality of his office, Christopher realized how presumptuous the whole thing was. Isabella was trying to make a living, not looking for romantic complications with her clients. His feelings were his problem, not hers. His phone buzzed with a text message. Christopher glanced at it and felt his heart stop. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Isabella Martinez. I found something in your apartment that I think was meant for someone else. I'll be there tonight to return it. Isabella." Christopher read the message 3 times, his pulse racing. Oh, but what had she found? One of his letters? The dinner reservation confirmation he'd printed and left on his desk? Before he could talk himself out of it, Christopher was grabbing his coat and heading for the elevator. Whatever Isabella had discovered, he needed to face the consequences in person. The drive to his apartment building felt like the longest 20 minutes of his life. Christopher's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe she'd found one of the older letters and assumed it was for someone else. Maybe she was planning to return it discreetly and forget she'd ever seen it. But as he rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, Christopher realized this might actually be the opportunity he'd been too scared to create for himself. If Isabella had found evidence of his feelings, then the secret was already out. he might as well be honest about the rest. He opened his apartment door to find Isabella waiting in the living room, looking nervous and holding a familiar piece of paper. She was out of her usual cleaning clothes, wearing a simple blue dress that made her look even more beautiful than usual. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, standing up quickly, "I'm sorry to bother you at home. I found this letter, and I think it was meant for your girlfriend. I thought you'd want to make sure she gets it." Christopher looked at the paper in Isabella's hands and recognized it immediately. It was the dinner invitation he'd written but never had the courage to give her. The letter that explained his feelings and asked if she'd be willing to meet him as Christopher, not Mr. Blackwood. "Isabella," he said softly, "that letter is for you." Isabella blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry?" "The letter. It's for you. All of them are for you." Isabella stared at him, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. "All of them?" Christopher took a deep breath. After 6 months of hidden feelings and secret letters, it was time to tell the truth. "Isabella, I've been writing letters about you for months. Letters I never planned to give you because the situation is so complicated. But if you found that one, then maybe it's time you knew the truth." Isabella's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The letters I found in your bedroom. The ones about someone humming while working and bringing music to empty rooms." "They were about you," Christopher confirmed. "Every single one." Isabella sank back into the chair, still staring at him in shock. "But why?" I clean your apartment." Christopher moved closer, his heart pounding. "Isabella, you're not just anything. You've transformed this place from an expensive hotel room into a home. You've made me look forward to Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays in ways I never thought possible. You've made me want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." Isabella looked down at the letter in her hands, then back up at Christopher. "This invitation to dinner, you wrote this for me?" "I wrote it for you, but I never planned to give it to you. I was afraid you'd think I was taking advantage of our professional relationship." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd learned. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Christopher, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you wrote about someone bringing light into your world, did you really mean that?" Christopher met her eyes directly. "I meant every word, Isabella. You've become the brightest part of my life, and I've been too scared to tell you." As they looked at each other across his living room, both of them felt like they were standing at the edge of something that could change everything. The only question was whether they were brave enough to jump. Isabella stared at the letter in her hands, reading Christopher's words with completely new understanding. What she had thought was a dinner invitation meant for his girlfriend was actually meant for her, a carefully crafted request to meet him not as his employee, but as someone he cared about deeply. "I can't believe this," she said quietly, looking up at Christopher, who was standing nervously by the windows. "All those months I thought you were this distant, cold businessman who barely noticed I existed." "I noticed everything," Christopher said softly. "The way you arrange flowers so they catch the morning light. How you always make sure the books are positioned so someone could actually read them. The way you hum that song from the radio. I looked it up and listened to it dozens of times just because it reminded me of you." Isabella felt her cheeks warm. "You heard me humming? I started working from home on your cleaning days just so I could hear you moving around the apartment. It made the place feel alive in a way it never had before." Isabella looked around the living room with new awareness. "Is that why there were always snacks waiting for me? And bottled water?" Christopher nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I wanted you to feel comfortable here. I noticed you always brought your own water, so I thought. I wanted to take care of you, even in small ways." Isabella felt a flutter in her chest. All those months she'd attributed his thoughtfulness to him being a considerate employer. She'd never imagined that Christopher Blackwood was paying attention to her preferences, her habits, her comfort. "But Christopher," she said, standing up from the chair, "I don't understand. You're a billionaire. You could date anyone, supermodels, socialites, CEOs. Why would you be interested in your cleaning lady?" Christopher's expression grew serious. "Isabella, you keep calling yourself just the cleaning lady, but that's not how I see you. You're intelligent. I've seen you reading the books in my study and making notes. You're kind. I've watched you rescue spiders instead of killing them, and water my plants like they're precious. You're principled. You could have snooped through my personal things dozens of times, but you always respected my privacy. Until today," Isabella said with a rueful smile. "You only looked today because you thought you were helping me get a letter to someone important. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Isabella walked over to the windows where Christopher was standing, still clutching his letter. The city lights were beginning to twinkle below them as evening settled over the skyline. "Can I ask you something else?" she said. "Of course." "If you've been feeling this way for months, why didn't you just ask me out? Why the secret letters?" Christopher ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly vulnerable. "Because I was terrified you'd say no. Or worse, that you'd feel pressured because I'm your employer. The power dynamic is already so unbalanced. My asking you out could put you in an impossible position." Isabella considered this. It was true that dating her employer would be complicated, potentially risky for her job and her reputation. But looking at Christopher now, seeing the genuine emotion in his gray eyes, she realized she'd been developing feelings for him too. Feelings she'd quickly suppressed because she'd thought they were completely one-sided. "What if I said yes?" she asked quietly. Christopher's breath caught. "What?" "What if I said yes to dinner? What if I told you that I've been looking forward to cleaning your apartment, not because I love dusting and vacuuming, but because it meant I might catch a glimpse of you?" Christopher stared at her. "You have?" Isabella nodded, feeling brave for the first time all evening. "I noticed things too, Christopher, like how you always made sure the apartment was the perfect temperature before I arrived. How you left technical manuals scattered around your desk but kept romance novels on your nightstand. Books I never would have expected a serious businessman to read." "You read those because you mentioned liking love stories," Christopher admitted. "I thought if I understood what you enjoyed, I might understand you better." Isabella's heart melted a little. "You read romance novels because of me?" "I read a lot of things because of you. Books on flowers because you seem to love arranging them. Articles about work-life balance because you mentioned going to college part-time. I probably learned more about you from watching your interests than most people learn about each other on dozens of dates." Isabella looked at Christopher, really looked at him, and saw not the intimidating billionaire she'd imagined, but a lonely man who'd been afraid to reach out for connection. A man who'd been expressing his feelings the only way he felt safe, through written words he never intended to share. "Christopher, can I read it?" she asked, holding up the dinner invitation. He nodded nervously. Isabella unfolded the letter and read it carefully. Christopher's handwriting was neat and precise, but the words were heartfelt and vulnerable. He invited her to dinner not as his employee, but as Isabella, someone he admired, respected, and cared about deeply. He acknowledged the complexity of their situation, but asked if she'd be willing to explore what might exist between them outside of their professional relationship. At the bottom, he'd written, "If this is completely inappropriate or unwelcome, Please disregard this letter and know that your job will never be affected by my personal feelings. You've brought so much light into my life already. I would never want to dim that light by making you uncomfortable. Christopher. Isabella looked up from the letter to find Christopher watching her anxiously. This is beautiful, she said softly. And yes. Yes? Yes, I'll have dinner with you. Yes, I'd like to explore this. And yes, I think I've been falling for you too. Even though I tried to convince myself it was impossible, Christopher's entire expression transformed. The careful control he always maintained cracked, revealing genuine joy and relief. Really? He asked, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Instead of answering with words, Isabella stepped closer and rose up on her toes to kiss him softly. Christopher's arms came around her immediately, and for a moment they stood together in his apartment, not as employer and employee, but as two people who'd been dancing around their feelings for months. When they broke apart, Christopher rested his forehead against hers. I can't believe you said yes, he murmured. I can't believe you wrote me love letters for months without giving them to me, Isabella replied with a smile. Christopher laughed, the first time Isabella had heard him truly laugh. I was terrified. You have no idea how many times I've rehearsed this conversation. Well, you can stop rehearsing now, Isabella said. I'm here, I'm interested, and I'm definitely hungry. So what do you say we go to that dinner you mentioned? Christopher's smile was radiant. I should probably call the restaurant. I canceled the reservation when I panicked earlier. Or, Isabella said with a mischievous grin, you could cook for me here. I've been cleaning your kitchen for 6 months. I know exactly what ingredients you have. Christopher looked at her with something approaching awe. You want to stay here? I want to be wherever you are, Isabella said simply. Besides, I'd like to see if you're as good at cooking as you are at writing love letters. As Christopher headed to the kitchen with Isabella beside him, both of them felt like they were finally stepping into the life they'd been too afraid to hope for. 2 hours later, Christopher's usually pristine kitchen looked like a disaster zone. There were pots on every burner, flour somehow scattered across the marble countertops, and what appeared to be remnants of a failed sauce splattered on the backsplash. I think, Christopher said, surveying the damage with a rueful expression, I may have overestimated my culinary abilities. Isabella laughed from where she was attempting to salvage what had been intended as a simple pasta dish. You know, for someone who's worth billions, you're remarkably helpless in the kitchen. I usually eat out or order in, Christopher admitted, stirring something that was supposed to be Alfredo sauce but looked more like lumpy milk. I can make coffee and toast. Beyond that, I'm lost. Well, lucky for you, I actually can cook, Isabella said, gently taking the spoon from his hands. My grandmother taught me when I was little. Why don't you sit down and let me fix this? Christopher hesitated. But I invited you to dinner. I should be cooking for you. Christopher, Isabella said, meeting his eyes with a warm smile, this isn't about traditional roles or who should be serving whom. This is about us spending time together. I want to cook for you. Christopher sat down at the kitchen island, watching Isabella work with practiced efficiency. She somehow managed to save the sauce, improved the seasoning on the pasta, and even found ingredients for a simple salad, all while making it look effortless. Where did you learn to multitask like that? He asked, genuinely impressed. Necessity, Isabella said, tossing the salad. I worked 3 jobs to pay for school. You learn to be efficient, or you don't survive. Christopher's expression grew serious. 3 jobs? I clean apartments in the morning, work at a coffee shop in the afternoon, and tutor English as a second language in the evenings, plus weekend shifts when I can get them. Christopher felt a sharp pang of guilt. Here he was worrying about whether to buy a new yacht, while Isabella was working herself to exhaustion just to pay for her education. "What are you studying?" he asked. Isabella's face lit up. "Business administration with a focus on hospitality management. I want to run my own cleaning company someday. Not just residential, but commercial contracts, hotels, office buildings, maybe even luxury apartments like this one." Christopher watched her animated expression as she talked about her dreams. This was the Isabella he'd fallen for, ambitious, hardworking, full of plans and hopes for the future. "Tell me more about your business plan," he said. Isabella looked at him uncertainly. "Really? You want to hear about it?" "I'm an investment banker, Isabella. I love hearing about well-thought-out business plans, and I'm curious about your dreams." As Isabella served the pasta and they sat down to eat, she began outlining her vision. She clearly thought it through carefully. Target markets, competitive analysis, staffing strategies, even financial projections for the first 5 years. Christopher found himself genuinely impressed. Isabella wasn't just dreaming. She was planning methodically and realistically. "Have you considered commercial partnerships?" he asked. "Hotels and office buildings often prefer working with established cleaning companies. But if you could demonstrate superior service quality—" "Actually, yes," Isabella said, pulling out her phone. "I've been tracking customer satisfaction scores from my current jobs, building a portfolio of references, and researching commercial bid processes." She showed him a detailed spreadsheet she'd created, tracking everything from supply costs to time efficiency per square foot. Christopher realized that Isabella wasn't just intelligent, she was business-minded in a way that most MBA graduates weren't. "This is remarkable work," he said honestly. "You've identified market gaps that most established companies miss." Isabella blushed. "You really think so?" "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being unrealistic." "Isabella, I've seen $100 million business plans that weren't half as well-researched as this. You're not being unrealistic. You're being strategic." They talked through dinner about business strategies, market opportunities, and Isabella's long-term goals. Christopher found himself more intellectually stimulated than he'd been in months. Isabella had insights about customer service and operational efficiency that came from actual hands-on experience, not theoretical knowledge. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said as they finished eating. "Anything." "How did you know you wanted to be in investment banking?" Christopher considered the question. "Honestly, I inherited the company from my father. I was good with numbers and financial analysis, so it seemed like the natural path. But I can't say I was passionate about it the way you are about your business plans." "Are you happy?" Isabella asked softly. The question caught Christopher off guard. He'd never really thought about happiness in relation to his work. It was just what he did, what he was good at, what was expected of him. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'm successful, but I'm not sure that's the same thing as happy." Isabella reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "What would make you happy?" Christopher looked at her, at this amazing woman who'd somehow ended up in his kitchen, asking him questions no one had ever asked before, and realized he knew the answer. "This," he said simply. "Having someone to talk to about real things. Having someone who sees me as Christopher, not just as Christopher Blackwood of Blackwood Investments. Having someone who challenges me to think differently about what matters." Isabella's smile was radiant. "Well, then it's a good thing I said yes to dinner." Christopher laughed and brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Isabella Martinez, you are full of surprises." "Just wait," Isabella said with a mischievous grin. "You haven't seen anything yet." As they cleared the dishes together, Christopher washing while Isabella dried, both of them laughing at his inexperience with basic household tasks, both felt like they were discovering something precious. This wasn't just attraction or romance. This was partnership, intellectual connection, and the rare joy of being completely understood by another person. And it was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, Isabella was humming as she organized Christopher's home office, not because she was there to clean, but because she was helping him reorganize his filing system to be more efficient. Their relationship had evolved quickly from secret feelings to genuine partnership, both romantic and professional. Christopher had insisted on helping Isabella with her business plan, offering insights from his years of experience in finance and investment. In return, Isabella had been teaching him practical life skills, cooking, organizing, and what she laughingly called normal person activities like grocery shopping and doing his own laundry. "Isabella," Christopher called from the kitchen, "do you want coffee?" "I think I finally figured out how to use the espresso machine without creating a disaster." "That would be amazing," Isabella called back, smiling at the pride in his voice. Christopher had been determined to learn to make her favorite drinks, approaching coffee preparation with the same intensity he brought to merger negotiations. As she sorted through files, Isabel came across a folder labeled Personal Confidential. She was about to set it aside unopened when several photographs spilled out onto the floor. Isabella knelt to collect them, but froze when she saw what they were. Pictures of herself. Not candid shots taken without her knowledge, but professional photographs that looked like they'd been taken by a private investigator. Isabella cleaning various apartments. Isabella leaving her coffee shop job. Isabella walking across her college campus. There were dozens of them, dating back months before she'd ever met Christopher. With shaking hands, Isabella gathered the photos and looked through them more carefully. There were also documents, copies of her employment records, her college transcripts, even her credit report. Isabella's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. Christopher hadn't fallen for her gradually while she cleaned his apartment. He'd had her investigated before she'd ever set foot in his penthouse. "Here's your coffee," Christopher said cheerfully, entering the office with 2 steaming mugs. He stopped short when he saw Isabella sitting on the floor surrounded by the photographs, her face pale with shock. "Isabella?" he said uncertainly. "What are those?" Isabella held up one of the photos, a picture of herself leaving her evening tutoring job, clearly taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. "You tell me, Christopher. What are professional surveillance photos of me doing in your personal files?" Christopher set the coffee mugs down with trembling hands, his face going ashen. "Isabella, I can explain." "Explain what? That you had me followed? That you investigated my background before I ever met you?" Isabella's voice was rising with each word. "How long have you been watching me?" "It's not what it looks like," Christopher said desperately, moving closer but stopping when Isabella flinched away from him. "Really?" "Because it looks like you're some kind of stalker who hired a private investigator to follow me around for months." Christopher ran his hands through his hair, looking more distressed than Isabella had ever seen him. "Isabella, please, let me explain the whole story." "The whole story?" Isabella laughed bitterly, standing up with the photos clutched in her hands. "You mean there's more?" "What else don't I know about our relationship?" "Nothing. Everything I told you about my feelings is true. Everything about falling for you while you worked here is true. Except apparently you were already obsessed with me before I ever set foot in this apartment." Christopher took a deep breath, clearly trying to gather his composure. "Isabella, 6 months ago, I was walking past the Meridian Hotel downtown. I saw you through the lobby windows. You were cleaning, and you were singing to yourself while you worked. You looked so joyful, so alive. I'd never seen anyone find happiness in something so ordinary." Isabella stared at him, her anger mixing with confusion. "You saw me cleaning a hotel?" "I couldn't stop thinking about you. I knew it was crazy, but I kept going back, hoping to see you again. When I finally worked up the courage to ask the hotel manager about you, he said you worked for Premier Cleaning Services. So you called my agency and specifically requested me? Christopher nodded miserably. I told them I needed a regular housekeeper for my penthouse, and I asked if they had someone experienced with luxury properties. They mentioned you had excellent references and experience with high-end clients. Isabella felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The photos, Christopher. Why do you have surveillance photos of me? Christopher's shoulders sagged. I hired a private investigator, but not to spy on you. I wanted to make sure you were safe. Safe from what? From me, Christopher exploded, then immediately lowered his voice. Isabella, I'm worth $3 billion. I have security threats, people who might try to hurt anyone connected to me. Before I let myself get involved with you, I needed to make sure you weren't in danger because of my feelings. Isabella stared at him, processing this information. You had me investigated for my own safety? I had your background checked to make sure there were no red flags that might put you at risk. Criminal associates, debt problems, anything that might make you vulnerable to people who might want to use you to get to me. Isabella looked down at the photos again, seeing them with new understanding. They weren't creepy stalker shots. They were security assessments. Her coming and going from work, her routine, potential vulnerability points. But Christopher, she said, her voice smaller now, you should have told me. You should have asked my permission. I know, Christopher said quietly. I know I should have. But I was terrified that if you knew how I felt, you'd disappear from my life completely. And if I told you about the security concerns, you'd realize how complicated being with me could be. Isabella sank into a chair, overwhelmed by everything she'd learned. Is there anything else? Any other secrets you're keeping from me? Christopher was quiet for a long moment. There's one more thing. Isabella's heart sank. What? The business plan you've been working on. The one we've been developing together. What about it? Christopher pulled a folder from his desk drawer and handed it to her. Isabella opened it to find a detailed financial proposal. Funding for her cleaning business, complete with startup capital, equipment loans, and commercial space leasing. You were planning to invest in my company? She asked, confused. I was planning to fund it completely. As a silent partner. You'd own 90%. I'd own 10%, just to make it legally clean. You'd never have to worry about startup costs or business loans. Isabella stared at the documents. It was everything she'd dreamed of. Full funding for her business, no debt, complete creative control. It was also completely overwhelming. Christopher, this is millions of dollars. It's an investment in someone I believe in. Isabella, your business plan is brilliant. You're going to succeed whether I help you or not. I just wanted to make it easier. Isabella felt tears building in her eyes. You investigated me. You had me followed for my safety. And you were planning to fund my entire business. All without telling me. I was going to tell you everything after we'd been together longer. I wanted you to know me as Christopher first, not as someone who could solve all your problems with money. Isabella looked at this man she'd been falling in love with and realized she barely knew him at all. Yes, he was thoughtful and caring, but he was also used to controlling situations and people through his wealth and influence. I need some time to think about this, she said quietly, standing up and gathering her purse. Isabella, please don't leave. We can work through this. Christopher, you made major decisions about my life and my safety without consulting me. You planned to fund my business without telling me. How am I supposed to trust you? Christopher's face crumpled. Because I love you. Everything I did was because I love you and want to protect you and help you succeed. Isabella paused at his words. It was the first time either of them had said love out loud. "I think I love you too," she said softly. But love doesn't give you the right to make choices for me, even good choices." As Isabella left Christopher's apartment, both of them felt like they were losing something precious before they'd fully had a chance to understand what it was. The question now was whether trust, once broken, could be rebuilt. For a week, Isabella avoided Christopher's calls and texts. She'd arranged for another cleaner from her agency to take over his apartment, and she'd thrown herself into her other jobs with determined focus. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. On Thursday evening, Isabella was closing up the coffee shop where she worked afternoons when her manager, Kevin, approached her. "Isabella, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Isabella looked up from wiping down the espresso machine. "What's wrong?" "That guy's been back every day this week, the tall one in the expensive suits. He orders a single coffee, sits in the corner booth for exactly 1 hour, and leaves when your shift ends." Isabella's heart clenched. "Christopher? That's his name, yeah? He's not bothering you or anything, but he looks miserable, like genuinely heartbroken miserable. And he tips $50 on a $4 coffee." Isabella glanced toward the corner booth where Kevin was pointing. Sure enough, Christopher was there, staring out the window with an untouched coffee in front of him. "How long has he been doing this?" "Every day since Monday." "Isabella, I don't know what happened between you two, but that man is seriously hurting." Isabella felt a stab of pain in her chest. She'd been so focused on her own sense of betrayal that she hadn't considered how Christopher might be handling their separation. "Kevin, would it be okay if I took my break a few minutes early?" Kevin nodded. "Take all the time you need." Isabella walked over to Christopher's booth, her heart pounding. He looked up when she approached, and she was shocked by his appearance. He was still impeccably dressed, but there were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," Christopher replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How are you?" "I'm confused and hurt, and I miss you." Christopher's eyes filled with hope. "Isabella, can we talk? Please? I know I messed up, but—" "Not here," Isabella interrupted, glancing around the coffee shop. "Your apartment?" 20 minutes later, they were sitting in Christopher's living room, the same space where Isabella had first learned about the love letters, where they'd had their first real conversation, where everything had begun. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this week," Isabella began, "about everything you told me, about the investigation and the photos and the business funding." Christopher leaned forward, his expression anxious. And I realized something. I was so focused on feeling betrayed that I didn't really listen to why you did those things." Christopher waited silently, hardly daring to breathe. "You had me investigated because you were worried about my safety. You had those photos taken to identify potential security risks. You were planning to fund my business because you believed in my abilities, not because you wanted to control me." "Ah, that's exactly right," Christopher said quietly. "Every decision I made was about protecting you or supporting your dreams." Isabella nodded. "But Christopher, that's also the problem." Christopher's face fell. "I don't understand. You made all these decisions for me without asking what I wanted. You decided I needed protection without consulting me about the risks. You planned to solve my financial problems without considering that I might want to earn my success myself." Christopher was quiet for a moment, processing her words. "You're saying that even though my intentions were good, I was treating you like you couldn't make your own choices." "Exactly. Christopher, I've been taking care of myself for years. I worked 3 jobs, I put myself through school. I've built a business plan from scratch. I'm not helpless, and I don't need someone to manage my life for me." Christopher rubbed his face with his hands. You're absolutely right. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I'm used to solving problems with money and resources, but I treated our relationship like a business problem to be managed instead of a partnership between equals. Isabella felt some of the tension in her chest ease. Thank you for understanding that. But Isabella, I need you to understand something too. The security concerns are real. I've had people threaten me, follow me, try to get close to people I care about. If we're going to be together, there are safety considerations we have to discuss. Isabella nodded. Then let's discuss them. Together. As partners who make decisions together. And the business funding? Isabella smiled for the first time in a week. I'd like to hear your proposal. As a potential investor who I might choose to work with, not as someone who's going to solve all my problems for me. Christopher's entire demeanor brightened. Really? Really? But Christopher, if we're going to make this work, we need to establish some ground rules. Anything. First, no more secrets. No more making decisions about my life without consulting me, even if you think they're for my own good. Agreed. Second, I want to contribute to this relationship equally. I know I can't match your financial resources, but I can contribute in other ways. I don't want to feel like I'm being taken care of. I want to feel like we're taking care of each other. Christopher reached for her hands. Isabella, you contribute more to my life than money ever could. You've made me happier in the past few weeks than I've been in years. And third, Isabella continued, I want to meet your security team. If there are really threats to consider, I want to understand them and be part of planning how to handle them. Christopher nodded seriously. I'll set up a meeting tomorrow if you'd like. Isabella looked at Christopher, this complicated, wealthy, well-intentioned man who'd turned her life upside down, and realized that despite everything, she still loved him. Okay, she said, let's try this again, but as equals this time. Christopher brought her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. As equals. Isabella, I promise I'll spend the rest of our relationship proving that you can trust me to respect your independence. And I promise to communicate better when something bothers me, instead of just running away. As Christopher pulled Isabella into his arms, both of them felt like they were finally building something real. A relationship based not on protection and provision, but on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine partnership. It was exactly what both of them had been looking for, even if they hadn't known it at the time. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the lobby of the Meridian Hotel, the same hotel where Christopher had first seen her cleaning and singing to herself. But today, she wasn't there as an employee. She was there as the owner of Martinez Premium Cleaning Services, negotiating a contract to handle all the hotel's housekeeping needs. Ms. Martinez, the hotel manager said, shaking her hand warmly, I have to say, your proposal is the most comprehensive we've received. Your staff training protocols and quality assurance systems are impressive. Isabella smiled professionally. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. We believe that exceptional service comes from well-trained, well-treated employees. Our staff retention rate is 95% because we invest in our people. As they concluded the meeting with a signed contract, Isabella felt a surge of pride. Martinez Premium Cleaning Services now had 12 commercial clients, 15 residential accounts, and 8 employees, all achieved through her own hard work and business acumen, with Christopher as a silent partner who provided funding, but no interference. The business relationship had worked beautifully because they'd established clear boundaries from the beginning. Christopher handled the financial investment and occasional strategic advice when requested. Isabella handled everything else: operations, hiring, client relations, and day-to-day management. Isabella, Christopher's voice called from across the hotel lobby. She turned to see him approaching with 2 cups of coffee and the warm smile that still made her heart skip. "How did the meeting go?" he asked, handing her a perfectly prepared latte. "We got the contract," Isabella said, grinning. Martinez Premium Cleaning Services just became the exclusive housekeeping provider for the Meridian Hotel. Christopher's face lit up with genuine pride. "Isabella, that's incredible. This is the biggest contract you've landed yet." "It's the biggest contract we've landed yet," Isabella corrected. "You're my business partner, remember?" "Silent partner," Christopher reminded her. "This success is all yours. I just provided some initial funding." Isabella reached up to kiss him softly. "You provided funding, strategic advice when I asked for it, and emotional support when I was stressed about expansion. That makes you a real partner." As they left the hotel together, Christopher took Isabella's hand. "So, to celebrate your latest business triumph, how would you feel about dinner tonight?" "Somewhere special?" "How special?" Isabella asked suspiciously. Over the past 6 months, she'd learned that Christopher's idea of somewhere special usually involved restaurants where a single appetizer cost more than she used to make in a day. "Special enough that you might want to wear that blue dress I love," Christopher said with a mysterious smile. Isabella narrowed her eyes. "Christopher Blackwood, you're up to something." "Maybe," he admitted, "but you'll have to trust me." That evening, Isabella dressed in the blue dress Christopher had mentioned, the same one she'd worn the night they'd first been honest about their feelings. As she put on earrings, she reflected on how much had changed in the past year. Her business was thriving beyond her wildest dreams. She'd graduated from college with honors. She and Christopher had found a balance between his wealth and her independence that worked for both of them. Most importantly, they'd built a relationship based on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine partnership. Christopher picked her up at her apartment. She'd kept her own place despite his offers to move in together, wanting to maintain some independence while they continued building their relationship. "You look beautiful," he said, offering her his arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Isabella replied, admiring his perfectly tailored suit. Instead of heading to one of the city's upscale restaurants, Christopher directed the car toward a familiar destination, Sunset Diner, the small restaurant where they'd had their first real conversation about their relationship. "Christopher, why are we here?" Isabella asked as they pulled up to the humble diner. "Because this is where everything really began for us," Christopher said. "Not in my penthouse, but here, in a place where we could just be 2 people getting to know each other." Inside the diner, Isabella was surprised to find it decorated with white roses and soft lighting. The other customers had gone, and soft music was playing in the background. "Christopher, did you rent out the entire restaurant?" "I may have made arrangements," he said with a smile. "Isabella, there's something I need to tell you." Isabella's heart began to race as Christopher led her to a booth in the corner, the same booth where they'd had their first honest conversation about their feelings and their future. "A year ago," Christopher began, "I was a lonely man who thought success meant having the biggest apartment and the most expensive possessions. Then I saw you singing while you cleaned, and I realized I'd never understood what real joy looked like." Isabella felt tears building in her eyes as Christopher continued. "You've taught me what it means to be truly happy. You've shown me that the best things in life aren't things at all. They're connections, partnerships, and shared dreams. You've made me want to be the kind of man who deserves someone as amazing as you." Christopher slid out of the booth and dropped to one knee beside the table, pulling out a small velvet box. "Isabella Martinez, you've changed my life in every way that matters. You've made me a better man, a better partner, and a better human being. Will you marry me?" Isabella stared at the ring, a beautiful solitaire that was elegant without being ostentatious, perfect without being flashy. "Christopher," she breathed, "are you proposing to me in a diner?" "I'm proposing to you in the place where we learned to be honest with each other, where we figured out how to be partners instead of just a wealthy man and the woman he was infatuated with." Isabella looked at Christopher's hopeful face and realized that this moment was perfect, not because of the setting or the ring, but because it represented everything they'd built together: honesty, respect, and genuine love. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as the small restaurant erupted in applause. Isabella looked around to see the diner staff and several of their friends, including Sarah from Sunset Diner and several of Isabella's employees, cheering from behind the counter. "You planned all this," Isabella accused Christopher, but she was smiling. "I had help," Christopher admitted. "Your business partner wanted to make sure you had the perfect proposal story to tell your clients." Isabella laughed and pulled Christopher close. "I love you, Christopher Blackwood, even when you're being sneaky and romantic." "I love you too, Isabella Martinez, soon to be Isabella Martinez Blackwood, if you'll have me." As they kissed again in the humble diner where they'd first learned to trust each other, both of them knew they'd found something rare and precious, a love built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the courage to be completely honest with each other. The cleaning lady who'd found love letters about herself had become a successful businesswoman who'd found her perfect partner, and the lonely billionaire who'd expressed his feelings through written words had learned to speak his heart directly to the woman who'd changed his life. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin with the smallest moments: a glimpse of someone singing while they work, a stack of letters left where they might be found, and the courage to believe that love can bridge any gap when it's built on honesty and respect. What did you think of Isabella's and Christopher's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one of our stories, and stick around to watch more heartfelt tales by clicking right here on the final screen.